Welcome. This video is documenting the prediction that famous singer-songwriter Paul Simon of Simon and Garfunkel will slip and fall and severely injure his head on December 19th, 2025. The post date on the social media platform that you are watching this video on proves that this prediction is being made ahead of time, as does this time-stamped email and forensic notes PDF document. If you are skeptical for some reason, please email me and I will forward these to you. The next 24 minutes of this video is an introduction that I am placing at the beginning of a dozen or so videos. This introduction regards the prophetic signs that occurred on October 30th and 31st, 2025. If you have already watched this introduction in another video, you can skip ahead no more than 24 minutes from this point. All right, it is predicted that famous singer Paul Simon of Simon and Garfunkel will slip and fall and severely injure his head on December 19th, 2025. This email was composed, as we can see here, on November 15th. Prior to October 30th and October 31st, 2025, it was predicted that Paul Simon would slip and fall and injure his head on October 30th, and it was predicted that the news of this would first be reported on October 31st. God orchestrated a myriad of connections from other prophetic signs in order to confirm this analysis for October 30th and 31st. In other words, these connections from the other prophetic signs were known in advance of October 30th and 31st to be pointing to October 30th and 31st. On October 30th and 31st, we received clear prophetic signs that are related to Paul Simon. October 30th and 31st was a step in the trail of signs that is leading to the date it is predicted that Paul Simon will slip and fall and injure his head, which is predicted to be on November 27th, 9 plus 9 plus 9 days after October 31st. All right. November 27th, 2025, also ended up being another step in the trail of signs that is leading to the date it is predicted that Paul Simon will slip and fall and injure his head, which is now predicted to be on December 19th. And we know this, the date December 19th, because of the prophetic signs that occurred on November 27th and other connections. Just like how we knew November 27th ahead of time because of the signs that occurred on October 30th and 31st, which the rest of this 18-minute introduction will explain. This introduction is extremely important. None of the videos, every minute of them, cannot be skipped. The reason why God does these, this is how it works. It works on the principle of interconnected signs. None of God's prophetic signs can be properly or fully understood without their context and connections with the other prophetic signs. And God does this in order to tell, for a very good reason, and that is to tell these stories that he wouldn't otherwise be able to tell without these interconnected signs that develop these stories through the information, through the themes and connections. And it is through these stories that God is communicating extremely important information and knowledge that everyone needs to know. Now, it's not complicated if you don't want it to be. In other words, if you are a skeptic and you don't want this prediction to be true, fair enough. Well, not fair enough. You are a completely irrational person when the prediction comes to pass on December 19th. Okay, but I'm going to explain how it works. And in this introduction, we now have two steps that were known ahead of time. It's not complicated. October 30th and 31st, and then once these dates came to pass, we received the clear and relevant prophetic signs that ended up pointing to November 27th, as I mentioned, which was 9 plus 9 plus 9 days after October 31st. And I'll explain why that's extremely irrelevant. You will see. Stay with me. Now, on October 27th, I'm just going to state briefly here, I'll explain it more in another video, or videos plural. We had the prophetic sign, one of them being the bat, the baseball bat. Paul Simon is known to be an avid baseball fan, as is the Antichrist, known to be a fan of the Chicago White Sox, which is why the fan of the Chicago White Sox, the first black president, who is the second of two Antichrists, was given as a gift a baseball bat from the historic legendary Chicago White Sox player, who was number 2, wore jersey number 2, and his name was Nellie Fox, and it was given to the first American Pope on his plane as he was departing Rome on his first international trip abroad to 2 nations. So God uses firsts in general for prophetic signs. Here we have the first black president from Chicago, who was an avid baseball fan of the Chicago White Sox. Everyone knows that, right? He threw out the first pitch in the playoffs. He famously wore his Chicago outfit when he threw the first pitch for the baseball team in Washington when he got booed for it. He also threw out the first pitch while wearing his Chicago stuff at the All-Star game after he became president. Okay, so he's Mr. Chicago White Sox, right? And anyway, he is also from Chicago, just like the first American Pope. And this number 2 bat was given to the Pope, the first American Pope, who is from Chicago, at the beginning of his 2-nation trip. So that gave us the number 22, which is a number that God uses in his signs to symbolize the mark of the Antichrist, which the Antichrist will enforce. And he also pairs 9 and 22 together. So this 9 plus 9 plus 9 days is followed with this sign that gives us the number 22. And it is 22 days from November 27th to December 19th, the date that is predicted that Paul Simon will fall and injure his head. And that's because the mark of the Antichrist will injure people's heads. And I should just, add why the number 22 symbolizes the mark of the Antichrist is because in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 9, the inverse of the mark of the Antichrist is described, and that would have been a Tav mark. The Tav letter in the Hebrew alphabet is the 22nd and last letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and the mark of the Antichrist is described in the last and 22nd book out of 22 books in the Bible that have a total of 22 chapters. Also, the mark of the Antichrist changes or alters a person's chromosomes, and chromosomes come in pairs of 2, and each chromosome has 2 arms, and so 2 and 2. And so that is enough for now. Like I said, I'll explain more about what happened on November 27th in another video. There's, of course, a lot more to this. I'm just saying this now just simply to establish how this works and how we get from October 30th and 31st, December 19th. Okay, now the rest of this video must be watched. I mean the rest of this introduction to this video, which will explain how October 31st connected to November 27th with 9 plus 9 plus 9 days. I won't explain how, I'll explain why. I'll explain how this is important. First of all, God repeats a number 3 times for emphasis of its symbolic meaning, and the most important number in God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel, is the number 9, as from the Bible, the number 9 symbolizes God's judgment. What do I mean by step in the trail of signs? Well, God's prophetic signs, none of them can be properly or fully understood without their context and connections to the other prophetic signs, something that is mostly missed by other people that are interested in God's signs. And this is also why the vast majority of God's signs are completely unknown and missed and are only being talked about on this channel. The reason why God does this is he is able to tell stories through the big picture of signs and interconnected signs that he wouldn't otherwise be able to tell from one single prophetic sign isolated on its own. That's why these signs are not recognized in general by other so-called watchers, and the signs that are recognized are not fully appreciated or understood. The reason why God tells these stories is in order to communicate extremely important information and knowledge that everyone needs to know, that is only being communicated or explained, I should say, on this channel. And for example, there was a tremendous theme that God was using for October 30th and 31st, Halloween, that God didn't, I assume, I can gather, want to use for the final date of Paul Simon's fall and then death. These signs and this theme of Halloween are extremely important, and you will see what I am talking about when you watch these other videos, including probably this video, because what I'm doing right now is making an introduction to these other videos that predicted October 30th and 31st. In other words, there are about 10 other videos that must be watched, every minute of them. And when the prediction comes to pass, the wise person will recognize that they do need to watch every minute of every video on this channel. When the prediction comes to pass that Paul Simon will fall and hit his head and injure his head on November 27th, and it being reported on November 28th, it will prove all of the analysis for October 30th and 31st, 9 plus 9 plus 9 days ahead of the predicted fall. And the reason why that's important is because this will prove all of the information in these other 10 videos that God was telling through these stories that he designed to lead up to October 30th and 31st. He didn't do this for any reason at all. He did this for extremely important reasons. And so that's the purpose of a step in the trail of signs. It further paints the picture and enables God to tell these stories. And these stories could not be possibly told without these steps that served to connect the other prophetic signs in the big picture web of God's signs. Believe me, I know far better than anyone the purpose for this prediction that is from God. And it is to prove the things that I am saying in these videos, and especially the controversial things that I am saying, which will be proven to be true because they are proven beyond a doubt through God's big picture of signs, which in turn will be proven to be true when this prediction comes to pass. And so hopefully I have made it clear why God did this for October 30th and 31st. In other words, what I'm about to explain in the next couple of minutes is an explanation for the prophetic signs that occurred on October 31st and 30th, and which are these dates that we expected such signs in advance of these dates. And when the prediction comes to pass on November 27th, it will prove that October 30th and 31st were indeed steps in the trail of signs, and therefore all of the analysis for October 30th and 31st that was explained in advance of these dates is 100% correct. To not appreciate this is to miss entirely the point of this prediction that is from God, the point of this video, and the point of the videos on this channel. You might as well turn this video off. If you do not appreciate this, you are wasting your time. Okay, so that's what's going on here. So that's, again, why it is that this video must be watched, and the rest of this video will talk about how God pointed to October 30th and 31st ahead of time, and now you understand why he did this and why it is important that you learn what God did to point to these dates ahead of time. Because what God did to point to these dates ahead of time are the stories that contain the knowledge that you need to know. On October 30th and 31st, we received clear prophetic signs that are related to Paul Simon, as we expected in advance of these dates. October 30th and 31st was a step in the trail of signs that is leading to the date it is predicted Paul Simon will slip and fall and injure his head, which is predicted to be on November 27th, 9 + 9 + 9 days after October 31st. Elvis Presley famously covered Simon's Bridge Over Troubled Water song, and Presley died from the effects of his fall in his mansion when he hit his head on a porcelain bathtub. Most people don't know this, but professionals believe that the true reason for Elvis Presley's death was not him taking drugs, but the drugs were taken to deal with the side effects from the severe head injury he had 10 years earlier in 1967, when he fell in his bathroom and hit his head on his porcelain bathtub and was unconscious for an unknown period of time. This, in turn, caused over the years increasingly severe autoimmune diseases as a result of the brain injury. And that's all related to, guess you know what? The Thing, and we will talk about that in these videos. The thing that causes autoimmune diseases. Now, Paul Simon's best-selling album is titled Graceland. His song Graceland is about his journey with his young son to visit the King of Rock, Elvis Presley, the King of Rock and Roll's mansion, Graceland Mansion, in the 4x4th state. Memphis, Tennessee is named after Memphis, Egypt, and Memphis, Tennessee is located in the area of the country that is nicknamed Little Egypt. Elvis Presley, incidentally, has a hit song named Little Egypt from his 9th soundtrack album, no less. The King of Rock's Graceland Mansion in Memphis is symbolic, and I say that because of the 4x4th state and the number 9, and I'm getting ahead of myself here because God pairs 9 and 44 together. So hold on a second. The King of Rock's Graceland Mansion in Memphis is symbolic of the King of Egypt's palace. And in the Bible, the King of Egypt is a type for the Antichrist king. The Antichrist king, who will reside in the White House mansion that has 44 plus 44 plus 44 rooms, and God repeats the number 3 times for emphasis of its symbolic meaning, and is located at 4x400 Pennsylvania Avenue. This Antichrist king is the 44th president, and he was inaugurated in the year 09. This is why in his big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, God pairs the numbers 9 and 44 together. On October 30th, King Charles, and by the way, in the Bible, the Israelites escaped the persecution from the King of the King of Egypt, and likewise the Pilgrims escaped the persecution from the King of England, which is King Charles. On October 30th, King Charles formally stripped, and Paul Simon sang about the Pilgrims in his song American Tune. On October 30th, King Charles, formally this date that we knew in advance to relate to Paul Simon, who God is using to point to the King of Rock and Roll. Okay, so on October 30th, King Charles formally stripped Prince Andrew of his royal titles. One of the main stories on October 31st, the following day, was the question of what would become of Prince Andrew's mansion. And also on this day, news broke that Prince Andrew had hired 40 prostitutes in 4 days while he was in the royal kingdom of Thailand. 40 prostitutes in 4 days hints at the number 44. In his signs, God pairs the numbers 23 and 44 to confirm his signs and connections. And by the way, this is how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works, which is only being explained on this channel. It works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses confirming a matter, as the Bible says is required, And this is what makes what is being explained on this channel true and not a product of one's imagination, and different and unique than everything else on the internet that claims to be an analysis of God's prophetic signs. And if we think about it, one simple way in which he would provide a second witness for us is through pairing certain numbers together, such as 9, 23, and 44. And I know these are the numbers because I have been studying his big picture of signs, patterns, and connections from morning until night for more than full-time hours for more than 7 years. Okay, and so the reason for 23 and 44 is because the 44th president was the basketball president who wore jersey number 23 in high school basketball. And also the thing alters a person's 23 pairs of chromosomes, the mark of the Antichrist. The 44th president is the Antichrist. So in his signs, God pairs the numbers 23 and 44 together to confirm his signs and connections. The news of Prince Andrew's 40 prostitutes in 4 days in the Royal Kingdom of Thailand was exactly 2 times 300 days after Prince William and Prince Harry visited the King of Rock's Graceland estate and mansion in the 4 times 4th state. And again, the news on this day was Prince Andrew's mansion. And exactly 2,300, or 2 times 300, I should say, days prior, the princes visited the king's Graceland mansion in the 4 times 4th state. That's a pairing of 23 and 44. Furthermore, it pairs with the 40 prostitutes in 4 days at the other end of this timeline. Okay, now this 2 times 300 days is the equivalent of exactly 4,200 days. And in Bible prophecy, the period of the Antichrist king's rule is symbolized by 42 months. Also, on October 31st, Trump, God's trumpet for prophetic signs, trumpeted that he had renovated the Lincoln bathroom in the White House mansion that has 44 plus 44 plus 44 rooms and is located at 4 times 400 Pennsylvania Avenue. President Lincoln was the 4 times 4th president. Also on October 31st, Trump had an interview in his mansion in the 9 plus 9 plus 9th state, Florida, with CBS for the first time since his $4 times $4 million lawsuit with this news company. That's another pairing of 9 and 44. The 9 plus 9 plus 9th state and the $4 times $4 million lawsuit. These signs on October 31st that hinted at the number 44, again, the 40 prostitutes in 4 days, and the Lincoln bathroom named after the 4 times 4th president in the White House mansion, which has 44 plus 44 rooms and is located at 4 times 400 Pennsylvania Avenue. Okay, these signs on October 31st that hinted at the number 44, including the sign in Trump's mansion in the 9 plus 9 plus 9th state, are 9 plus 9 plus 9 days before Simon is predicted to slip and fall and injure his head in his house or mansion, if you will, on Thanksgiving on November 27th, 2025. The 4 times 4th president formally began the tradition of celebrating Thanksgiving on the 4th Thursday of the month of November. November is Latin for 9. The renovation of the bathroom in the White House mansion that is named after the 4 times 4th president hints at how Elvis died in his bathroom in his Graceland mansion from the effects of the fall that he had in his bathroom in his mansion years earlier. Likewise, Simon, who sang about the Graceland mansion, is predicted to slip and fall and injure his head and ultimately die from his head injury. Okay, I should also add that the Graceland mansion is in the 4 times 4th state. And so the renovation in the bathroom of the White House mansion that is named after the 4 times 4th president hints at how Elvis died in his bathroom in the Graceland mansion in the 4 times 4th state. from the effects of the fall he had in his bathroom in his mansion years earlier. Likewise, Simon, who sang about the Graceland mansion, is predicted to slip and fall and injure his head, like Elvis did, and ultimately die from his head injury. Also on October 31st, Trump, God's trumpet, trumpeted that the U.S. is considering conducting a military raid in support of the persecuted Christians in Nigeria, Africa. Simon's Graceland album was controversial because he visited South Africa during apartheid and he used South African musical influences in his songs on the album. One of the released singles from the album is Under African Skies. This video is documenting the prediction that famous singer-songwriter Paul Simon of Simon and Garfunkel will slip and fall and severely injure his head on October 30th, 2025. And the first news of this is predicted to be reported on October 31st, 2025. And it is predicted that Paul Simon will die on November 5th, 2025. The date that this video was posted proves that this prediction is being made ahead of time, as do these time-stamped emails and forensic notes PDF documents. If you are skeptical for some reason, please email me and I will forward these to you. All right, welcome. This video is predicting that famous singer-songwriter Paul Simon of Simon and Garfunkel will slip and fall and severely injure his head on October 30th, 2025, and it's predicted that the first news of this will be reported on October 31st, 2025, the day after. I wanted to make this video to talk about the prophetic Game 3 of the World Series. It's amazing, and God will confirm that the information I'm about to present is true through the prediction for Paul Simon. Okay, it's relevant to Paul Simon because, for one thing, Paul Simon is known to be an avid baseball fan. But this video isn't about Paul Simon. It's about what God wants to communicate, and then through the prediction, prove that what I'm about to communicate is true. Okay, that's the purpose of the prediction. And I know far better than anyone the reason and purpose for this prediction that is from God. And I'm about to explain some truly profound things. So let's get started. And let's begin with what I wrote here. This Game 3, okay? We're talking about this Game 3 of the World Series this year between the Los Angeles Dodgers and Toronto Blue Jays. This Game 3 tied the record for most innings in a World Series game at 18, which is 6 plus 6 plus 6, which is the number of the Antichrist in Bible prophecy and the mark of the Antichrist. Okay, and this record, and God uses records for signs. So this record, most innings, 18 innings. So if you don't know baseball, a regular game has 9 innings. This 18-inning game was essentially 2 games. Okay, and if the score is tied at the end of 9 innings, at the end of a normal 9-inning game, the game goes into extra innings until one team takes the lead and wins the game, and then the game stops. So in other words, the game continued to be tied all the way up until the 18th inning. Okay? And so this is very interesting because the last time this happened, the other record-setting game that went to 18 innings was also a Game 3. Okay? And it was exactly 7 years ago. Well, it was in 2018. It wasn't the exact date. Well, then again, wait a second. Maybe it was. It was within one day of an exact 7 years. But regardless, it is 7 years in terms of prophecy here because it's game 3 to game 3. And also, this is extremely relevant because in the most central prophecy in the Bible, a period of 7 years is symbolic of the end times and the period of the Antichrist. And it is only symbolic for those that don't know that yet, which is like pretty much everyone, I think, that's interested in prophecy. Everyone still thinks that it's an exact 7 years. But when this prediction comes to pass, it'll prove that this is God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel. And it overwhelmingly proves that this 7 years, and also, by the way, the 1,260 days, for those who know what I'm talking about, is only symbolic. Okay? And it already began. We are already inside the 7 years, which began symbolically on January 1st this year, which is why, incidentally, there was 7 plus 7 deaths in the 6 plus 6 plus 6th state in the attack in New Orleans with the truck. And then later in the day, another 7 were injured when the Tesla truck exploded in front of the Trump Hotel in Las Vegas, which is the 6 times 6th state. But that's just scratching the surface of how that's confirmation of the symbolic beginning of the 7 years. But I'm not going to get into that subject any more than I just have, except to say that that was also a Paul Simon sign because it was a Wednesday morning at 3 a.m. was the timing of the attack. And Paul Simon and Garfunkel's first album was Wednesday morning, 3 a.m. But for the relevance of all of that, I also explained countless other times in other videos. And also, when the prediction comes to pass, the wise person will recognize that they need to watch every minute of every video on this channel. Okay, that's why I won't repeat everything every time. So, we have these two record-setting games. But the thing about them, too, is that they were both played in Los Angeles. And there are 2 baseball teams in Los Angeles, but they were both played in the Los Angeles Dodgers Stadium, exactly 7 years apart. And that's because God is using Los Angeles to hint at fallen angels, which is, of course, relevant to the end times in the book of Revelation, which is essentially a time in which the demonic realm collides with the earthly realm. Okay, so now what's also a parallel is that both of the games were won after 18 innings with a walk-off home run in the bottom of the 18th by Los Angeles. A walk-off home run is when a player hits a home run to end the game. Okay, it means that the game is over because the game doesn't need to continue anymore. The team has just won in the bottom of the inning of the last inning of the game. In this case, it was the 18th inning. Okay, so both games were won in dramatic home run fashion. Okay, both were walk-off home runs, and they were solo home runs as well, both of them. 7 years apart, and both in Los Angeles. Both record-setting 18 innings, okay? And that's because, as I'm explaining here, which is why I wanted to make this video, because it's giving me an opportunity to explain at least a small part of the extremely prophetic 2018 World Series, which I made a video about afterwards back then, but that's long lost. So this information is not on the internet anymore, and I'm not even going to explain it all, but at least I get to explain some of it. So the hero of and I'll explain why the 2018 World Series was particularly extremely prophetic. And so here we go. So the hero of the 2018 World Series, the player that hit the home run to end the game, was player number 13. And the hero this year that hit the home run to end the game after an exhausting 18 innings was player number 5. 13 plus 5 equals 18. And again, the game went to 18 innings in both years. And the first of these 2 instances was in the year 2018. And again, 18 is 6 plus 6 plus 6, which is the prophetic significance here. The name of the hero of this year is Freeman. The hero in 2018 had what the media called a Cinderella story, and the game went past midnight. The first time that a World Series game went past midnight, local time. All right, and that's saying something too, because the game starts early because it's on the West Coast and it's a World Series game, so it has to start early so the East Coast audience can watch the game. So that the fact that it went past midnight is exceptional, but of course it went 18 innings, so you get the idea here. But the prophetic significance of this is twofold. One, it confirms the Cinderella story, or I should say vice versa. The Cinderella story confirms the significance of the game going past midnight, the first time this had happened in a World Series. Well, at least, I guess on the West Coast? Well, whatever. Okay, so anyway. So the reason why it was a Cinderella story is because the player at the time was a rags to riches story. From what I recall, it was a long time ago, but the prior year or even earlier in that season, he was in the minor leagues and, trying to get to the majors. And it's not like he was a young guy and a rookie or something. He was just a guy that wasn't really making it in the majors or something. He was in the minor leagues, okay? Not a fresh out of college player. So he was a rags to riches. He arrived at the Dodgers on a really low salary, and he ended up being the hero of the game. So it was like a rags to riches story, which is why the media called it a Cinderella story. But of course, in the story Cinderella, it's all about the clock ticking midnight, which also was the case with this game. But the reason for that is because of, in the Bible, Jesus speaking about the midnight cry at the time of the rapture. And the rapture is a rescue of God's faithful who will be freed from the persecution from the Antichrist and Satan. That's why Freeman hit the home run this year after midnight. 7 years after the game winning home run after midnight by the man that was a Cinderella story. Okay. The faithful of God's will be rescued from the mark of the Antichrist, which is symbolized by 666 in Bible prophecy, and will be rescued from fallen angels, as in Los Angeles. And then they will celebrate victory in heaven. And so that's what happened after these 2 game-winning home runs. The home stadium erupted into a celebration with their victory, especially after the long, exhausting 18 innings. It was quite the celebration, as you could imagine, if they were still not too tired to celebrate. Okay. The hero of the game in the 18-inning game in the year 18 was number 13. This hints at Revelation 13:18, which is the passage regarding the mark of the Antichrist in which the number 666 occurs. Okay, so again, he was number 13. It was the year 18, but it was also the record-setting at the time 18-inning game. And it still is the record, it's just now been tied. Again, 18 equals 6 plus 6 plus 6 as well. But anyway, this hints at Revelation 13:18 because he was player number 13. And the reason why this hints at Revelation 13 is because of what I mentioned and explained, the Cinderella story and the game going past midnight. And then the midnight cry. Well, actually, the cry went out in the stadium once he hit the home run. It was a cry of celebration. All right, but it was a midnight cry, actually. Okay, forgot that part. So, and again, Jesus talks about this midnight cry in context of the rapture, which is what the Cinderella story and the midnight thing is all about in the game. So that's why this is relevant. The fact that his number is 13 and the number 18 occurs here is because it really does hint at Revelation 13:18. Now, this player number 13 is still playing with the Dodgers 7 years later. And I had thought about how uncanny that is. Normally, Major League Baseball players don't stay with a team that long. And also, normally after a team has some success in a World Series, it's not long before that team completely changes because of economics. To keep the star players around costs money, and that's why teams don't really, have dynasties in baseball, because they just move around where they get paid the most. Okay, and so it's really quite, and also baseball careers don't last that long. You got to be really good to be around for that long. Furthermore, if we recall, he began with a Cinderella story. He wasn't doing well. He was in the minor leagues. But now he's been around for 7 years, which further adds actually to the Cinderella story. The fact that he's around 7 years later for this other 18-inning game, which was a parallel with his game. But that's more contribution to the Cinderella story. And as I've been following the Lord's signs, including the LA Dodgers signs, he uses the Los Angeles Dodgers a lot, for many good reasons. I had been, each time I see this player, his name is Muncy, each time I see him involved in some prophetic play or something, I'm like, wow, this guy's still around with the Dodgers. I'm sure he's the only player that's still with the Dodgers from the 2018 Dodgers team. But which is a coincidence, because the reason for this is exactly what I'm talking about right now. This parallel with him 7 years earlier, with the same scenario. And to highlight it even further, God has included the same player to be sticking around the whole time. So that's quite something. I'm sure, I haven't thoroughly gone through all of the media stories, but I'm sure they mentioned this. I'm sure of it. That, this guy was the guy that won it the other time in Los Angeles after 18 innings, and he still plays for the Dodgers. So it's a big part of the story, okay? And anyway, as I wrote, he is part of this story in Game 3 this year because he played in the other 18-inning World Series game. Okay, now I'm going to get into something very interesting here. Now, before the 18th inning, or during the top of the 18th, I had a feeling it would be a repeat of 7 years ago. I saw this coming. Once I realized that the game was going that late, I think, because I'm a little slow, sometimes, it could have been realized a lot earlier, but I'm sure I recognized it by around the 17th inning, that wait a second, this really is going to be a repeat, because you don't really expect it, right? But this really is going to be a repeat of 7 years ago. At the time, I didn't realize it was 7 years, because that's also prophetic. Had I known that, I probably would have recognized it earlier. And maybe around the 14th inning, I could have recognized this, But, so anyway, I had a feeling before it even happened that this was going to happen. I had a feeling this was going to happen before it happened. And then it happened, okay? Okay, so, and again, I've explained what happened. It was the parallel between the two games. Okay, so the 2018 Game 3 was the number 13, who was the Cinderella story, hit the home run past midnight, which was all symbolism for the rapture. By the way, this is the first email that I'm writing here, October 27th. This other email that was just reading, October 28th, okay? It's before October 30th and the prediction for Paul Simon and him falling and severely injuring his head, which will be reported on the 31st. Now, all right, so we have that established already. Now, here's the thing. This Game 3 in 2025 went for 6 hours and 30 minutes. This isn't the only time God has used a very important prophetic sign that lasted for 6 hours and 30 minutes. This first instance that I know of was way back in 2000 and maybe it was 18 actually. If not, it was 19. But anyway, there was a plane, actually it was departing Los Angeles, that's right, and returned 3 times to the airport. for 3 separate mechanical issues. And from what I recall, it was Flight 33, and it was an Airbus 330. And yeah, so it returned 3 times for 3 separate mechanical issues. But it spent a total of 6 hours and 30 minutes in the air. The passengers on the plane were, of course, frustrated, and then they finally had to deboard the plane after 6 hours and 30 minutes. But that's because it's equivalent to 390 minutes, which is the word in the Greek concordance for return, which is why they returned 3 times. Okay, for 3 separate mechanical issues. The whole story was about how the plane kept returning. Okay, so there was more to that story. The name of the plane, because it was Hawaiian Airlines, and they name all of their planes, and the name of the plane was after, I think, the star Sirius, which is the brightest star in the sky, but in the Hawaiian name for that star, which is the star that symbolizes the Messiah. But that's what we're getting at, because this instance of the word that is in the Greek concordance for return in Greek was used by the Apostle James when he quoted Amos 9:11, which regards the return of the Lord to rebuild his temple. So anyway, that's not the only instance of the 6 hours and 30 minutes being the sign. The amount of time is the sign itself, and it equaling 390 minutes, okay? Okay, so I gave you one example of that. Now we're talking about the Lord's return, which is, of course, what the signs are for, revealing the timing of the Lord. And for those that have the misinterpretation and mistranslation of Matthew 24:36, no one knows the day or hour, the most quoted verse in the Bible, when this prediction comes to pass, it'll prove that you are wrong. Yes, it's true. No, there's no debate. There's no arguing. There's no discussion at all, period. End of discussion. You're wrong. You have a wrong interpretation of that passage. And I know I'm speaking to like 99.9% of quote-unquote Christians that use this passage as an excuse to not watch something that Jesus commanded. For instance, in Revelation 3:3, speaking of Flight 33 that returned 3 times, the timing of the return of the Lord, in Revelation 3:3, Jesus says to those, "So, for if you do not watch, you will not know at the hour at which I will return. Therefore, if you do watch, you will know the hour," obviously. But that's not the only example that flatly contradicts your interpretation. There are many, many other passages that contradict it. Furthermore, why in the world would we be watching? For what? It's obviously to watch for the timing of the Lord. And for those that are like in between, you want your cake and eat it too, who say, well, we can know the season, but we can't know the day or the hour. Hogwash. Malarkey. And you're only having that position because you're still tied to the heretical doctrine of imminence, which is a false doctrine from Satan. The doctrine of imminence is false. There's so many contradictions. So I don't want to get into that. I don't want to make this video about theology or doctrine. This is not about doctrine, but that's why I'm going to use a hammer on you and be blunt and drive it into you. When the prediction comes to pass, it'll prove what I'm saying is true. And I know far better than anyone the reason and purpose for this prediction that is from God. To not appreciate that is to miss entirely the point of this prediction, this video and video channel. You might as well turn off the channel if you don't appreciate this. You are wasting your time. You do not get it. Okay? This prediction is not for you to go, oh, cool, neat. You were able to know this ahead of time. That's pretty interesting. No, that's not the purpose of the prediction. It is possible to know the timing of the Lord's return. Furthermore, Amos 3:8, the Lord does nothing without his servants first knowing what he's doing. And also, we have the examples in the Bible of God's servants knowing the precise timing of the impending judgment. For example, Noah, which is why right after Jesus mentioned no one knows the day or the hour, but it's not translated correctly, he gets into a parenthesis and talks about Noah. And what do parentheses mean? It means that there's a thing that's contradicting what was just said. It's like related to what was just said. That's what a parenthesis is. Okay? And Noah knew the timing of the Lord's return. But the truth is, actually, to be fair, the Lord purposely hid the knowability of the timing. Okay? It's for the purpose of fooling people that don't want to watch. He purposefully camouflaged it so that you would, if you wanted to, buy into the false doctrine of imminence. That's actually the truth of what's going on. And also to give you pastors, which Jesus forbid. Because the master of the house that would not let the thief break in if he knew the timing of the Lord is referring to pastors, because Jesus is the thief. And that's why if you talk about anything regarding the timing of the Lord inside a alpha male dominated so-called church where the guy gets up on stage for about 45 minutes and performs and gets paid, if you're in one of those settings and you talk about anything related to this, you'll be immediately escorted out of the church. It's like the worst thing you can possibly do is talk about how the doctrine of imminence is not true. But you wouldn't even talk about, you just even say something about a prophetic sign. If you ask the average quote-unquote Christian if they could name one prophetic sign, even though Jesus commanded them to watch, they wouldn't even understand the question. They would be like, what are you talking about? That's how lost they are. They are the sleeping bridesmaids, which Jesus warned, and in that passage, incidentally, he commands to watch. The sleeping bridesmaids were not watching. They didn't know the timing of the Lord. They didn't have enough oil because of it, which is the case with a lot of quote-unquote Christians. Now, the 5 that were sleeping and did make it, they weren't watching either, but they had enough Holy Spirit, which is symbolized by oil. So none of the 10 bridesmaids were watching, but some made it anyway, which is going to happen with the rapture. There'll be people that have no idea about any kind of prophetic signs that will make the rapture. And according to the parable, it's 50%, but I suspect it could very well be far less than that of quote-unquote Christians, far less than that. It's just a metaphor. But at least 50%, you could say. I'm sure it's probably more, but that's just my opinion. Are not going to make the rapture. And it's because they're sleeping. And it's because of the false doctrine of imminence. That's a big part of it. You cannot understate that. It really does matter. The reason for knowing is to keep you awake. There's a purpose for watching. It's not just for, oh, cool, neat, God's doing these prophetic signs. But I don't really need to know about it. I just love God. I just love Jesus. I don't really need to know about these prophetic signs. That's cool, you got something going on here in this video, but I'm not going to take it into my memory. I'm not going to remember it 5 minutes later. I'm just going to go about my day and, read the Bible a little bit, whatever you want to do, but I'm not going to really think about it at all. And so because they don't need to, because no one knows the day or the hour. So it's kind of irrelevant. That's why. It's not relevant. No one knows the day or the hour. There's no real point. What are you going to do? In their minds, you're like, what's the point? What's the purpose of this? Okay, cool, you're doing that, but it's not really that productive, is what the pastor would say. But Jesus commanded us to watch. And they're not watching. But he commanded repeatedly to watch. For very good reason. Because the doctrine of imminence is false. Anyway, when you ask them for the one prophetic sign, they don't even recognize the obvious one, which is the Star of Bethlehem. But what was the Star of Bethlehem? It was a sign for who? Who recognized it? Because it was a sign, right? And it wasn't for everyone. It was for the wise men. And they knew the timing through this sign of the Lord's first coming. And when they arrived to Jerusalem, King Herod and everyone were like, what are you talking about? What sign? We didn't see it. They didn't see it because it was there, but they didn't recognize it. It was in the night sky. They simply didn't recognize it. Why? Because they weren't interested in this sort of thing. They weren't interested in prophecy. They weren't interested in the Bible, in other words, because 1/3 of the Bible is prophecy. And the Christian tradition is a prophetic tradition. Revelation 19:10, the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. But yet they weren't interested in prophecy, and neither are they today. But if we think about it logically, if there was a sign for the wise men who were watching to recognize for the precise timing of the first coming, wouldn't it be logical that there would be a sign for the people watching, the servants, that God does nothing without telling them first about the timing, including the precise timing, not just the quote-unquote season of the Lord's return? Well, of course there would be. In fact, it's not just one sign, it's thousands of signs, which literally the vast majority have been missed, including by the supposed watchers, for a couple of big reasons. One, they're not watching enough because they are on the fence. They still don't really believe that it's that important, because no one knows the day or the hour anyway. We know the season, and so now that we know the season, we don't really need to pay attention to the details. That's pretty much where most quote-unquote watchers or people that are interested are. They're like, it's somewhat interesting, but I'm like focused on my other Christian stuff because, well, we already know the season and it's going to be soon. We don't really need to pay attention to the details. It would only be by someone who knows that the doctrine of imminence is from Satan that God would be able to reveal his true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel. Because how many people do you know that think that the precise timing of the Lord is possible? Even the watchers, quote unquote, don't know that or think or believe that. And so they're half interested. At least they're half interested. The vast majority of Christians are not really interested at all. But another reason why the majority of the signs aren't recognized is that the full intended meaning of all of the prophetic signs cannot be fully or properly understood without their context and connections with the other prophetic signs, which is only being explained on this channel. That's right. When they see these signs, if they see them, they don't really know what to make of it. They don't understand them because they don't know the context. For example, the other signs that occurred on the same date, but also how they connect to other signs. And it is only through these connections and patterns that God is able to tell these extremely important stories that have the extremely important information and knowledge that everyone needs to know, that is only being explained on this channel. It's through the connections and the full intended meaning of the signs, like, for example, I'm explaining in this video. Now, another reason why the other quote-unquote watchers don't really get it, unfortunately, and they have some brilliant things that they discover. Some, I do learn from others. That's not to say that they don't discover things that I wouldn't have discovered. But the reason why they don't really get it, though, and miss the vast majority of the signs, another reason, is that for whatever reason, the vast majority of quote-unquote Christians that are watching or whatever, I shouldn't use the quote-unquote part, but the vast majority of the people that are watching, for whatever reason, attribute these signs to Satan. They're not from Satan. They're from God. And if you don't recognize that, well, how in the world are you going to appreciate what God is doing? This is a thing that gets a lot of people. And I find that the people that are misguided on this are generally have the conspiratorial mindset. It's good to recognize that there are conspiracies, and there certainly are, and Satan is behind them, etc. But they go overboard. There's rational reasoning and conspiracy fact. Anyway, I just find that in general, they have an excessive amount of conspiracy theory infused with their Christianity. It's like a mix, because conspiracy theory has become a religion. And so they're like mixing the conspiracy theory religion with Christianity, which is the thing that God hates the most. The mixing of false religion with true religion. It's the thing that the Jews were chastised for repeatedly and then ultimately exiled, for mixing with the pagan religions of their neighbors. Well, in our modern culture, we have what you might call the rise of a new religion, which is this conspiracy theory religion. Some of them are Christians and some of them aren't. And they both are part of this movement, which tells you something that it isn't Christian. But these people are, in general, I find a lot of the watchers, that, especially the ones that attribute the Lord's signs to the devil, are also part of the other false religion of conspiracy theory. How Satanists are behind all of these things. Like, they would actually say, in fact, if they were to try to explain what I'm explaining in this video, they wouldn't be able to. Not these particular signs. But if they were to try to explain something similar, they would attempt in some way to explain, to say, purport that they're the result of Satan and Satanists. They would say, for example, all sports are rigged, and the guy that hit the winning home run was part of the Satanist conspiracy, etc. I mean, it's just ridiculous, which is why they're not able to watch properly, and God can't use these people. So the guy that God is going to reveal his true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections to, one, doesn't subscribe to the false heretical doctrine of imminence, and is not the extreme conspiracy theorist. Otherwise, those other people can't be used. They're used for useful things. Don't get me wrong. I've learned some things from other people, the ones that are, for example, like excessively into conspiracy theory and attribute God's signs to Satan. But there's no way that they're really going to get the big picture and understand things. And that's why what's being explained is only, the big picture of signs anyway, is only being explained on this channel. All right, so I got off subject, but I got that out there. And I got it into a video that will have a prediction for Paul Simon, and so theoretically it should be watched by many people, and hopefully this will help many people that are, for example, attributing God's signs to Satan and are therefore not able to really recognize what's going on. Now, what we had here again was this 390-minute game. Okay, and it wasn't exactly 6 hours and 30 minutes, but media articles did say it was 6 hours and 30 minutes. It was actually, from what I read, 6 hours and 39 minutes, but that's enough to make it 6 hours and 30 minutes, okay? Now, the reason why all this is important is because of this, speaking of the timing of the Lord, the age of fishing for men, which began with 13 disciples, 12 plus Jesus. I know there were more, but this is just symbolism, okay, for God's purposes. So there was 13, which began symbolically the beginning of the age of fishing for men. Now, Jesus' last miracle, in which 153 fish were caught in the net, was symbolic of the end of the age of fishing for men. Just for example, the text says that the fish were caught, I think it was 200 cubits from shore, which was symbolic of the 2,000 years, which is itself only symbolism. Okay? And it was his last miracle, so it symbolizes the end of the age of fishing for men. It was 153, one of 3 unusually specific numbers in the Bible. This number is very prophetic. I could talk, probably 10 to 20 minutes about this number. But anyway, 13 times 153, in other words, the beginning of the age times the end of the age of fishing for men, gives us 1989. That's why in 1989, I'm jumping ahead now, in Game 3, we had the extremely prophetic World Series earthquake, when, by coincidence, the two teams in the San Francisco Bay Area from cities that are connected with a bridge were present when this earthquake hit right at the beginning of the game, right at the beginning of the broadcast, which in itself was prophetic. I've made lots of videos about all of this. It's extremely important. When James Earl Jones read a poem about baseball being a homecoming by the recently deceased commissioner of baseball, who and on, okay? I almost went off on a tangent. I mean, like, I could talk to you literally for over an hour about the 1989 World Series earthquake. Now, but it was by coincidence, okay? Now that these two teams were playing at that time. So in other words, also, the whole world watched this earthquake live and the reactions in the stadium and all of this and the broadcasters. And what it did, though, one of the more well-known incidents of destruction it incurred was the collapse of the Bay Bridge that connected the two cities, which was symbolic of the bridge that is between man and God, Jesus. The earthquake struck just 10 miles outside of Santa Cruz, California, in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and Santa Cruz is Spanish for Holy Cross, as in the bridge. Now, there's lots more to that, like I'm saying. Now, so the thing is the reason why that occurred in 1989 is exactly what I'm saying. Because when asked by the disciples for the signs of his return, Jesus replied with earthquake signs. Well, this is the ultimate earthquake sign in the league of 9/11. And it is like 9/11 in the sense that it's a coincidence that more people didn't die. In other words, it was designed by God out of God's mercy. Because because the earthquake occurred during rush hour, but because the two teams from the Bay Area were in the World Series, no one was on the highway. They were all in front of TV sets. And as a result, not that many people died. It would have been otherwise much more. Likewise, had the events of 9/11 occurred like 20 minutes later, far more people would have been in the World Trade Centers, arriving for work. Okay. So, anyway, but it was 1989. Now, the reason is, the 1989 World Series earthquake hints at the 13 disciples times the 153 fish, like I explained. That's why the earthquake in 1989 during Game 3. By the way, it was the World Series. I mean, how did the baseball championship get named World Series? Think about that. How did that even happen? Well, it was designed by God. And partly it's for this. In 9/11, we had the World Trade Center, and in the 1989, we had the World Series earthquake. It's judgment on the world that's coming. Primarily America first, though, God's Gentile nation, because the judgment is commensurate with the amount of light and blessings a nation received. And so in order of in the order of God's interest in terms of judgment, first is America, and next are the English-speaking countries, and after that are other West European countries, and then after that are other nominal Christian countries, like Catholic countries, which aren't really Christian, but kind of. But anyway, okay. So we have the 1989 years, and we have the 1989 World Series earthquake. Well, Jesus began his ministry in 29 AD, and we know that from the Gospel of Luke. It's not a controversy. It's not a speculation. Okay? It says right in the Gospel that Jesus' ministry began in the 15th year of Tiberius, and we know from history that Tiberius began his reign in 14 AD. So 14 plus 15 is 29 AD. Now, that's why when we add 1989 to 29 AD, we get 2018. That's why the 2018 World Series was so extremely prophetic. It was symbolic of the end of the age of fishing for men, because it was 1989 years after 29 AD. And 1989 is why the earthquake occurred in the world during the World Series 29 years before 2018. In other words, this Game 3, the Cinderella story and the rapture sign in Game 3 in 2018 that I've already explained, was the 29th anniversary of the 1989 World Series earthquake, which was also in California, by the way. All three of these Game 3s we are talking about in this video are all in California. Now, okay, so that's why, now, there were so many parallels also with the 1989 World Series. For example, the 2018 World Series opened with James Taylor singing the national anthem in Boston. Well, the opening of the broadcast of Game 3, the ABC network played the song Hello, Old Friend by James Taylor, which was itself symbolism or a hint at, because it came right after James Earl Jones read the poem about baseball being a homecoming. And the homecoming, of course, is referring to Jesus, the second coming. That's why the song after that was Hello, Old Friend by James Taylor, which is why the 2018 World Series 29 years later began with James Taylor. And on and on. There's like so much to the 2018 World Series, but I'll just end it like on that note for now. Okay, and again, 2018 was 29 years after the 1989 Game 3 World Series earthquake, because Jesus' ministry began in 29 AD and began with 13 disciples, and 13 times 153 is 1989 years, which gets us to 2018. Now, in Bible prophecy, in the most central prophecy, is a symbolic 7 years. And this year was 7 years. And this Game 3 was 7 years after the Game 3 in 2018. And both of them, as I just explained, had these parallels with the 18 innings and all of that, and the home run that ended the game, etc. Okay? All right, now, so the 1989 Game 3 was also exactly 36 years before this Game 3 in 2025. The number 36 hints at 666, the number of the Antichrist. The 7 years period symbolizes the Antichrist, but also this 36 years period symbolizes the Antichrist, because 36 hints at 3 sixes, but it's also 6 times 6, and also 2 times 18, which is 6 plus 6 plus 6. And also the 36th triangular number, which in a triangle of numbers, the last number in the 36th row is 666. And 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 all the way up to 36 equals 666. Okay, and so that's why we have this 666 years connection between these two Game 3s. The one with the World Series earthquake, which by the way was in San Francisco, because the first of the two Antichrists is Pope Francis. But this other one at the other end was won by Freeman, which hints at the rapture and rescue and the freeing of God's faithful from the mark and persecution from the Antichrist, the Pope. And again, it all is about the mark of the Antichrist, because number 13 hit the winning home run and the 18 inning game in the year 18 because of Revelation 13:18, which is about 666. Because that's where the number occurs, Revelation 13:18. By the way, it says to calculate the number of the man. Well, how do you calculate the number of the man? Well, through his name. And it also says, the prophecy says, it's for those who are wise. And therefore, those who are unwise will not be able to get this. But those who are wise will find it very simple and straightforward and obvious. The title of the Pope in the medieval days, including on a very famous, well-known decree that began the Catholic Church, a significant one regarding the Catholic Church, the Pope's title, and it's on his staff and his crown, Vicarius Filii Dei, which is Latin for Vicar of the Son of God, because the Pope claims to be the representative of God, which is blasphemy. But the Vicar of the Son of God in Latin, Vicarius Filii Dei, is in Roman letters. Well, we use the Roman alphabet. English uses the Roman alphabet. But this is in Latin, in other words, the Roman language. And in and Vicarius Filii Dei is equal to, in Roman numerals, which are letters, 666, 666. That's what the equivalent numeric value of Vicarius Filii Dei adds up to. Now, the reason why the wise don't get this, or the unwise don't get this, or they'll say, "Oh, that's interesting," and I always thought maybe that there was something with the Catholic Church, and maybe the Pope could be the Antichrist. They're still not wise enough to get it. But the wise will get it because the wise understand that the Pope is always going to be the Antichrist. Not only is it clear from Old Testament prophecy, for example, Daniel chapter 9, the prince who is to come is of the people who would come and destroy the city and the sanctuary. Well, who destroyed the city and the sanctuary? The Romans. And the first emperor was the first pope. The first pope was an emperor. And, but anyway, there wouldn't have been a Protestant Reformation without the knowledge that the Pope is the Antichrist. But we've lost that wisdom, and today people are unwise. And they don't recognize that Catholicism, I'm talking about other non-Catholics, they don't recognize that Catholicism isn't Christianity. It's not a legitimate denomination of Christianity. It's man-made religion on top of the Bible, the thing that God hates the most. As again, the Jews did this. They mixed their true religion with the pagan religion of their neighbors, which is what Catholics do. Because when Rome converted in 313 AD, which is why, by the way, Pope Francis was elected on the date 313 in the year 13, when Rome converted, it didn't do away with its pagan traditions. It just repackaged them to make it look like Christianity. And for example, the worship of the fertility goddess, Ishtar, Aphrodite, Isis, it goes back to Babylon, the home of pagan religion, which is, by the way, why Peter, in his writing in the epistle, in the Bible, referred to Rome as Babylon. And Peter was never in Rome. There's no evidence for that. It's ridiculous. He wasn't in Rome, but he also referred to Rome as Babylon in a derogatory way. And so, okay, so that's enough of that. But I had to, I guess, mention that because we are talking about the San Francisco Bay earthquake, the World Series earthquake. And we are talking about the 666 from Revelation 13:18, which is about the number of the man, and that's what his number is. I'll just give you a little image to help you see that. 1 second. Okay, so you can see here, the Pope's title that's on his crown and his staff. The staff, by the way, it's another carryover of pagan religion, because the priests of Dagon had the same morbid, crooked staff that the Pope has, and on and on. So Vicarius Filii Dei, okay, 666 is what it equals to. Actually, I may have confused the staff with the mitre hat. The Vicarius Filii Dei title is on the hat, which also is from the priests of Dagon. Because when you look at the weird looking Pope hat, if you look at it from the side, it's a fish head, and it's even got the two tails from the back. That's the fish tails, but the side of the hat is a fish head, because the pagans back in the day worshipped the fish god Dagon. Why did they worship the fish god, by the way? Well, that's related to how they worshipped fertility, and vaginas are in the shape of a fish. So there's this other coincidence involving this game. The coincidence is the famous country music singer Brad Paisley performed the national anthem before the game, which, by the way, does hint at the coincidence of James Taylor back in the 2018 World Series that I already explained. But anyway, we have Brad Paisley doing the national anthem before the beginning of this Game 3. And as the news articles point out, Brad Paisley has done this performance of the national anthem prior to 4 Los Angeles Dodgers World Series games. Okay? In each case, the game went into extra innings, including the one 7 years earlier, when it went to 18 innings. Not only was the player number 13 involved in both of these games 7 years apart, these 2 18-inning games in the World Series, the record setting, but Brad Paisley, in both cases, sang the national anthem before the game. But he also did it 2 other times, and in both of those other cases, the games also went into extra innings. And by the way, it's not common for a game to go into extra innings. The game has to be tied after 9 innings, and that's not common. But that's why it's a huge coincidence here. And as far as I know, I think the articles mentioned that these are the only times, and no, I'm sure of it. These are the only times that Brad Paisley has performed prior to a World Series game. And in each case, the game went into extra innings. Okay, so now the article talks about the luck of Brad Paisley. It's just that you have to wait. You have to wait a long time for the game to end, but when Paisley sings, the Dodgers are more likely to win. And that's because 3 out of the 4 times the Dodgers won. This is pointing to Paul Simon. This is amazing. Because as I've explained countless other times in other videos, Paul Simon is pointing to the Hebrew idiom, or rather Paul Simon as a prophetic sign, is pointing to the Hebrew idiom in the book of Amos for 3 transgressions and for 4, which means the tolerable limit of transgressions has been exceeded, and now judgment and destruction are unavoidable, which is what Paul Simon's death will symbolize. Okay, Paul Simon began the period of grace and opportunity to repent and turn back to God after the warning on 9/11, and he opened the broadcast, as in the opening of the game by Brad Paisley. Simon opened the broadcast, that just came to me, but that's also extremely relevant here, of the Saturday Night Live broadcast right after 9/11, 4 days after 9/11. His 4th album with Garfunkel is Bookends. It contains the hit song America, and Paul Simon's death will be the other bookend to the period that America was given after the warning of judgment and destruction. Since that time, America hasn't returned to God. It has raced exponentially even further away. Okay, and so now, that's amazing because, yeah, Paul Simon opened the broadcast. That's why Brad Paisley opened the World Series here game. And 3 out of the 4 times for 3 transgressions and for 4. Now, how does Paul Simon point to 3 transgressions and for 4? This Hebrew idiom. Well, he's Jewish, but also his first album with Garfunkel is Wednesday Morning, 3 a.m. That's the title of the album. That album contains Sound of Silence. And in Revelation 8:1, a sound of silence is observed in heaven before the 7 trumpets of judgment on the world, which is why Paul Simon's most recent album is 7 Psalms and is hit late in the evening, a name in which also hints at the late hour for repenting and coming back to God, heavily uses trumpets and is known for doing so. And so the judgment begins, in other words, after Simon's death, because it will point to Revelation 8:1, because of his song Sound of Silence that launched his career. That's followed in Bible prophecy by the judgments for 3 transgressions and for 4. So the album for 3 transgressions and for 4 hints at 3 and 4 because Wednesday is the 4th day of the week. And in ancient Israel, the 3 a.m. was the beginning of the 4th watch for 3 transgressions and for 4 in the book of Amos, in the 1st chapter, which has 15 verses, which is why Paul Simon's prophetic dream, in which a voice instructed him to make his most recent album, 7 Psalms, and to name it 7 Psalms, occurred on the date 115, as in Amos chapter 1 with 15 verses, in which the Hebrew idiom for 3 transgressions and for 4 is repeated. The first agent to sign Simon and Garfunkel before their first album was Wally Amos, who lured them into his office through a gift of cookies. And then Wally Amos went on to found the biggest cookie company in history, Famous Amos Cookies, which is assigned by God to confirm the significance of Wally Amos, or Famous Amos, which points to the famous prophet Amos. And the first chapter, in which the Hebrew idiom is repeated, which is why the first album for Wednesday morning, 3 a.m. So, we have this Paisley opening of the game, which points to Simon opening the broadcast of Saturday Night Live 4 days after 9/11. And this Paisley game, Game 3, is 4 days before it's predicted that news will be reported of Simon's fall and severe injury of his head. That's for 3 transgressions and for 4, Game 3. But also Paisley has performed 4 World Series games. And like I said, the Dodgers won 3 of them. So Paisley, this was his 4th World Series game that he performed at, is 4 days before the death of the news of Paul Simon's fall. Now, it's predicted that Paul Simon will actually fall 3 days later on the 30th, but the news will be reported on the 31st. That's why the LA Dodgers won 3 of the 4 games. When we add the 3, we get to October 30th. Because the game and the singing of Paisley was on the 27th. Now, lastly here, Paisley and Simon connect to each other. They've both praised each other's work. Both are very famous and have long, prestigious careers in their music. But they also perform together for this amazing thing that makes it a prophecy. It's the annual charity event called All for the Hall. And that's because Paul Simon is being used, as you know by now if you watched any other videos, for the mansion symbolism. He sang about the Graceland Mansion, his best-selling solo album, Graceland, and the song Graceland points to Elvis's mansion, which ultimately points to the mansion in which will dwell the Antichrist, the White House mansion, and also points to the hall, the ballroom, in the movie The Shining, because Paul Simon famously dated Shelley Duvall, whom he met on the movie set while filming the movie Annie Hall. And Diane Keaton, the star of the movie, her maiden name is Hall, which is where Woody Allen got the name Annie Hall from. But Simon famously broke up with Shelley Duvall, which also rhymes with Hall, at the airport before she got onto a plane to the UK to film the movie The Shining, which is about a demonically possessed large hotel, as in mansion symbolism, and is also specifically about a strange, demonically possessed ballroom, as in a hall. Now, there are these coincidences in the movie The Shining that are from God, not from Kubrick. Those that don't know God and don't think that God would do these things, etc., don't know how to properly understand what I'm about to talk about. Because there are a lot of people that are familiar with this coincidence, which is that the number 42 is contained within the movie. For example, in the movie, the boy Danny and the mother, Shelley Duvall, are watching a movie called Summer of 42, which was a big movie in 1971 that was nominated for 4 Academy Awards. The reason for why I emphasize 4 is because the demons will cross over into the earthly realm as described in the book of Revelation chapter 9 once the door is opened with the key. And Paul Simon was born in 41, and the word key is equal to 41 in simple English gematria, and he's the GOAT, greatest of all time of music, pop music composition, which uses keys, music keys. And the 4th letter of the Hebrew alphabet is also a symbol for a door. That's why the number 4 with Paul Simon signs. That's why he performed 4 days after 9/11, because of Revelation 9/11 that symbolizes the demons coming through the door. Okay? Now, the movie Summer of 42 was not put into the movie by Kubrick so that he could play a neat little coincidence game for people involving the number 42. No, he chose that movie because of its theme of child sex abuse. Because in the movie, there is this theme of child abuse. Okay? That's the reason for the movie Summer of 42. Now, did Kubrick put the other 42s in the movie because of the movie Summer of 42? Well, no. For example, in the movie, the boy Danny, who watches the movie Summer of 42, wears a shirt with number 42 on his sleeves. But from what I have read, the crew responsible for the clothing of Danny just brought a pile of clothes to the movie set, accumulated a large pile of clothes, and they just selected from the pile. Like, I've read, for example, that they didn't select a sweater with the Apollo 11 on it because of the room number 237 and the moon being 237 miles away from Earth. That's a coincidence. Like, I've read the people who did that were responsible for the sweater saying, no, that's just a coincidence. We didn't plan that. And why can't we attribute it to God? Why do these people have to say, why do they have to say, no, they're lying? Why would they lie? No, it was from God. Why is it always a conspiracy? The Satanists are doing it. Give it a rest. It's from God. Okay? Now also, the room 237, when we times the numbers, 2 times 3 times 7 equals 42. And the room 237 is not because it equals 42. I've read about the history about that, and the hotel had, the Kubrick originally wanted to have the room 137, but the hotel objected because they had a 137 in the hotel, but they didn't have a 237. And in retrospect, they should have, because it would have brought the hotel more fame. But they were reluctant. They were uneasy about the idea of having this, horror room named after one of the rooms in their hotel. So Kubrick changed it from 137 to 237. It's not because it times the 40. It makes it. It's not because of an equation equals 42. Also, at the beginning of the movie, we have a image of the hotel from the outside, and people have counted the number of cars in the parking lot, 42. That's not by Kubrick. That's just a coincidence. And how do we know that? Because the other examples clearly aren't. Okay, so if the other examples clearly aren't designed by Kubrick, then why would the 42 cars be? Okay? So, it's from God. Now, why is this from God? Now, even if Kubrick did do the 42s, it's still from God. It's not necessary. I mean, God could have used Kubrick to play a little game with 42, but that's not what happened. God made it even more spectacular than that by not including Kubrick in on it. But even if Kubrick was in on it, doesn't change anything. Just makes it a little bit less spectacular. But what it all points to is the hall in the mansion hotel that was used by the Nazis to officially formulate the final solution for the Jews. The bloody murder, as in Red Rum in the movie The Shining, another thing from God. The bloody murder of the final solution is the reason for the 42, because of the conference in the hall, in the mansion that is a hotel, or was a hotel, I don't know if it still is, that the Nazis used, which, by the way, was used because the hotel is an overlook of the lake, and the name of the hotel in the movie is the Overlook Hotel, another coincidence by God to point to the Holocaust and the final solution of the Jews. But what's that all about? Well, that's in itself a hint at Bible prophecy, which talks about the Antichrist, whom Hitler is a type for, who will persecute true Christians and Jews in the final days when there will be another Holocaust, a genocide, a politicide of the political left, of their arch enemies, true conservatives and true Christians. And I say true because there will be many quote-unquote Christians that are on the wrong side. And even, supposed conservatives too. But that's the reason for all of this. Now, what's all this really going on here too is that the Graceland song about the mansion, which now we know points to the Holocaust through the movie The Shining, a movie about demonic possession. And that's why, again, Annie Hall and Shelley Duvall and the performance here with Simon and Paisley, in which they riffed with each other and I believe sang Homeward Bound together at this concert. It's called All for the Hall. That's amazing. All for the Hall. And I just learned this today, and I realize, and I say that with emphasis in my voice because I've known for a long time that God is using Paul Simon for hall symbolism because of The Shining and now the ballroom hall, but also the mansion, the Graceland mansion and the White House mansion. But in the last couple of weeks, it's come to the realization that this is not only about The Shining, which has been known for a long time, Paul Simon and the movie The Shining through Shelley Duvall, but the ballroom hall specifically, which, by the way, is the reason for the recent stories about Trump's ballroom at the White House. Okay? But so we have also it all pointing back to the hall that was used by the Nazis for the final solution. Now, it's all about the demonic possession of people through brainwaves, which is why Paul Simon will injure his head. It'll point to this. The first lyric, the symbolic beginning of the song of Graceland, and by the way, centuries ago, before the invention of titles, believe it or not, there was a time when that was prior to the invention of titles. Literary and music compositions, literary documents were titled by the first line of the piece or the composition. It's called an incipit. The incipit for the song Graceland is the Mississippi, and by the way, the most famous incipit of history is "It was a dark and stormy night," which, by the way, God has used for a prophetic sign in the past. That's how I know all of this. It was a dark and stormy night. The cliche, right? That's because it was the most famous incipit. Well, the incipit of the song Graceland is the Mississippi Delta was shining like a national guitar. It was a dark and stormy night. The Mississippi Delta was shining like a national guitar. Well, what's happening here is that music is frequencies, and people after they take the mark of the Antichrist and have the components that are in it inside them that migrate to their brains, will then come together and make a sort of transistor that will receive 5G frequencies. That's why all of this is described in the fifth of 7 trumpets in Bible prophecy. The 5G frequencies will trigger the transistors, and that will engender delta brainwaves, which will facilitate demonic possession. And so that's why the Mississippi Delta was shining like a national guitar. Because shining hints at the movie The Shining, which is the term for this demonic possession in the movie. God has also backed us up with another second witness, which is John Lennon's and the Beatles' one of their most famous hits, and the first ever alternative rock music song, Tomorrow Never Dies, in which Lennon sings about tuning your brain, and then, I forget the lyrics exactly, tuning your brain, come in, tune out, whatever, and it is not shining, it is not dying, it is shining. That's the song, if you know what I'm talking about now. Maybe that rings a bell. Maybe I should just get the lyrics. But anyway, it's about the shining, and it's about meditation and stuff like this. It's about brain waves. But it's also about not dying. Okay, because, in Lennon's perspective, it's some convoluted thing about reincarnation. But what it is a prophecy. Because what's going to happen is the demons pretending to be aliens will promote the mark of the Antichrist, the SHOT, and promise immortality for those who take it. And then they will become demonically possessed. They'll try to reach immortality without God. It'll be the same lie as the first lie ever told in the Garden of Eden to Eve when the serpent said, "You shall surely not die." Well, the final big lie of the age is the same as the first. Okay, now, so that's what's going on here, and I think we've covered it all here. That's why Paisley and Paul Simon performed together at the All for the Hall thing, which ties them together, which makes Paisley's performance at the baseball game relevant to the prediction for Paul Simon, who was a baseball fan, 4 days later and 3 days later, because Paisley sang three times when the LA Dodgers won. So 3 and 4 days for 3 transgressions and for 4. Wednesday morning, 3 a.m. Sound of Silence, Paul Simon. The bookend, his death being the bookend, which by the way is predicted for November 5th, the bookend to the warning of judgment to America, hence the album Bookends that contains the song America. Because when Paul Simon dies, it will be God's sign, his big symbolism, his big symbol that will communicate that the period of opportunity to come back to God is over. And now judgment and destruction are unavoidable, which is what the Hebrew idiom for 3 transgressions and for 4 means. Believe me, I know far better than you how the prediction made in this video was derived. And more importantly, I know far better than you why the righteous Christian God of the Bible has given me a voice through this prediction. If you are a quote-unquote Christian or Muslim, this prediction was not learned through a demon. Be warned that blaspheming the Holy Spirit is the unforgivable sin. If you are a New Ager or New Spirituality person, this prediction was not learned through somehow tapping into the supposed universal collective consciousness. If you are a conspiracy theorist, this prediction was not learned through figuring out a supposed code that the Illuminati and Satanists are using. This prediction was learned through the Bible and through watching carefully the Lord's prophetic signs. which Jesus commanded all Christians to do. Besides proving that Jesus Christ is the Lord, the reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction is to prove that the controversial things that I am saying in the videos on this channel are the truth. Therefore, a wise person will want to watch all of the videos on this channel. What I will also do is create a video or two that summarizes some of the controversial things that the Lord will prove to be true when the prediction being made in this video comes to pass. I will leave links to these must-watch videos in the description box below this video. Again, the purpose of this prediction, that is from God, is to prove these things that I will talk about. And therefore, it would be foolish to not watch the videos that I will leave links for in the description box below this video. Aliens and UFOs are demons masquerading as aliens and UFOs. Most people's spiritual experiences are demonic deception, especially if they are not a true follower of Christ. In the last days, many people who claim to be a follower of Christ will have spiritual experiences that are in reality demonic. God became a man and died a horrible death at the hand of the ruler of this world, Satan, and then defeated death for you, so that you too can overcome death, which is the price that must be paid for sin. It is time to repent, which means to change one's ways and turn to God and become a disciple of Jesus. Do not listen to or follow the example of most quote-unquote Christians. Instead, follow the teachings of Jesus, which most quote-unquote Christians ignore. Like Jesus, you must surrender your life. Put nothing ahead of Jesus, your Lord. Like Jesus, you must lay down your life so that you may live. As Jesus said, one must die first, like a kernel of wheat going into the ground, in order to then grow and produce fruit. And like Jesus said, one must produce fruit, or else like a branch or a tree not producing fruit, they will be thrown into the fire. Jesus was speaking to quote-unquote Christians when he said this. One must die the self in order to be born again. And like Jesus said, one must be born again to enter the kingdom. Like Jesus, you must sacrifice your life for the sake of the coming kingdom. It means to do work that involves some form of sacrifice and risk. To have faith does not mean to intellectually agree. You need to demonstrate your faith through taking action. To have faith means to trust in God's promises. Taking action demonstrates trust and fear of the Lord. The primary reason that the wrath of God is coming upon America is quote-unquote Christians that do not get what I have just explained. The only reason a Christian is alive is in order to help other people become Christians and make it to the kingdom. Do not be deceived by those on the political left claiming to be quote-unquote Christians. There is no such thing as a Christian on today's political progressive left. Jesus said, "Do not think I have come to abolish or change any bit of the law or the prophets of the Old Testament Bible." In other words, the God of the Old Testament Bible is the exact same God of the New Testament Bible. It is essential that you learn about the God of the Bible and his ways. The God of the Old Testament Bible is looking to see who will fear him, and to fear God is not the same thing as quote-unquote revering or honoring God. Through Christ's ransom payment, a Christian is someone who has been redeemed and freed from slavery to sin and Satan. In response, a true Christian recognizes that their life in this world does not belong to them, and they become a willing slave to Jesus for the sake of the kingdom. Please leave a like and upvote the video, and once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more, don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. And don't only put the link to this video or another video on this channel in comments sections of places you typically visit, but importantly, put the link to the video in places you never visit, where people who don't think like you visit. If you are a quote-unquote Christian, nothing in terms of an evangelism tool compares to this video with its prediction. It is a massive bag of gold. Beware of Jesus' warning through the quote-unquote Christian that did nothing with his bag of gold and was banished to hell. Also, read Ezekiel chapter 3 and 33 for this same warning. If you think you might be spending too much time watching videos instead of working and sacrificing for the kingdom through handing out flyers and potentially helping hundreds of people in the same length of time as a video, my flyer is filled with amazing information that people need to know right now, and it points people to the video channel. Now is not the time to be handing out typical evangelical tracts that are largely based in error anyway, such as, quote, Jesus loves you, unquote, for example. You can hand out the flyer on busy street corners, put them on car windshields in busy parking lots, and put them in mailboxes. Just send the file to your local print shop. You can download the file from the website. Please leave a like and upvote the video, and once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more, don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. It is essential that everyone immediately read the homepage of my website, asteroidprediction.com. If you are watching this on the YouTube platform, please note that not all of the videos are on YouTube. You need to switch to the Odyssey.com or Rumble.com channel, and do it now in case you aren't able to later.